A millionaire CEO lost everything overnight, and only one person didn't walk away. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Enjoy the story. Blake Harrison wasn't just another name among Manhattan's elite. He was the name. At 37, he ran a tech conglomerate worth billions, headquartered in a glass skyscraper that mirrored both the sky above and his boundless ambition. His office, perched on the top floor, was a modern sanctuary of elegance and control. Italian marble, designer furniture, carefully curated contemporary art. Everything meticulously placed. Everything except for him. Blake entered each day with purposeful strides, his face always unreadable. Colleagues revered him, shareholders feared him. The media idolized him. His name floated among the most powerful magazine covers, conference panels, power rankings. But a closer look revealed the emptiness behind those piercing eyes and that perfectly rehearsed smile. For Blake, success came like a whirlwind, fast, overwhelming, and isolating. He lost his mother at 16. His father, a cold-hearted banker, never saw him as a son, only as a project. Blake grew up surrounded by numbers, goals, and relentless pressure. He learned early on that vulnerability was weakness and love was merely a dispensable variable in the equation of victory. With that, he built a world where real connection had no place. His relationships were strategic, his romantic encounters brief and impersonal. The luxurious penthouse in Tribeca remained perpetually silent. Not even a dog kept him company. And deep down, though he would never admit it, he knew. The empire he had built was far too vast to make room for a heart. It was in this kingdom of gold and marble that a soft, almost imperceptible presence began appearing more frequently in the cold hallways of the company's headquarters. Emily. But Blake didn't yet know that her name would change everything. Emily Carter arrived early, always before sunrise. The dim corridors of Harrison Tech seemed to whisper secrets only she could hear. She moved her cleaning cart quietly, her hair tied up in a casual bun, earbuds playing songs that reminded her of home. A modest place in Newark, with thin walls and dreams tucked away in drawers. She wasn't just a janitor. She was a quiet observer of the world. She noticed faces, gestures, the small details. She knew who stayed late, who cried in the bathroom, who faked smiles just to fit in. And among everyone moving through that empire of glass, one face intrigued her more than any other: Blake Harrison. Emily wasn't one to fantasize about princes or heroes, but there was something about Blake that defied the obvious. A silence behind his poised demeanor, a rush in his steps that seemed to lead nowhere. She always saw him arrive wrapped in an aura of absolute control, but never in laughter, never in hugs or casual conversation. He was the center of that universe, and yet somehow he seemed on the outskirts of it all. She never expected to be noticed. Her job was to clean, tidy up, and disappear, and she did it with grace and care. One morning, as she quietly organized the break room on the 32nd floor, she heard footsteps and instinctively looked up. It was him, alone, no phone in hand. No security, just him, standing there with a distant gaze fixed on the coffee machine, as if he had momentarily forgotten what it meant to be the most powerful man in that building. Their eyes met, and for one eternal second, Blake didn't look away. He studied her with a quiet curiosity, as if seeing someone there for the very first time. Emily, not knowing why, felt her heart stumble in her chest. He simply nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and walked on. But that fleeting moment would be etched in her memory as an invisible shift, silent, yet irreversible. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. From that day on, something subtle began to unfold. Blake started to notice, not with words, but through the smallest gestures. Holding the elevator door, returning a murmured "good morning," leaving his coffee cup exactly where she could find it without searching. Emily couldn't understand the reason, but she felt it, that despite the worlds that separated them, a fragile, growing thread had begun to connect the two. She was a woman forgotten by the world. He, a man remembered by all, but who, maybe for the first time, longed to be remembered by someone like her. In the monotonous, mechanical routine of Harrison Tech, Blake and Emily's encounters started to repeat themselves, almost as if fate, discreetly, was stitching their days together with an invisible thread. He, always in a hurry, always carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, found in certain moments of the day brief pauses where his eyes would unconsciously seek out that delicate figure in a navy blue uniform. She, on the other hand, could no longer remain neutral. Her heart leapt every time she saw him walking down the corridor, as if the air around him shifted the very energy of the space. Their glances turned into silent conversations, a second longer of eye contact, a shy smile when they crossed paths at the elevator, a small nod as if to say, "I see you," and that was enough for both of them. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, the unexpected happened. Blake dropped a folder of documents as he hurried out of the meeting room. Emily, walking by with a damp cloth in hand, immediately knelt to help. Their fingers touched, lightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to freeze them both for a moment. Blake's eyes drifted down to hers, and there, on the polished hallway floor, something stirred. He thanked her in a low voice, with a smile he hadn't worn in years, genuine, kind, unguarded. Emily simply nodded, her cheeks flushed. She stood up quickly, like someone afraid to linger too long inside a dream. After that, small gestures became frequent. Blake began leaving polite notes in the break room with a thank you for always taking such good care of everything. And Emily, while cleaning his office, started to notice how everything was always in perfect order, almost as if he didn't want to give her extra work. Each new encounter was a silent dance, a symphony of glances, comfortable silences, and a tension that grew slowly, like a heart warming up after a winter that had lasted far too long. No one else noticed, but they knew something was changing. And the most curious part? Neither of them was in a hurry, because, for the first time, time itself seemed to be on love's side, not working against it. It was a rainy Friday night in New York. Heavy clouds hung low, as if foreshadowing what was about to unfold. Blake Harrison was still in his office, his tie loosened, eyes fixed on the screens displaying plummeting graphs, like the world was screaming in silence. And in a way it was. In just a few hours, a leak of confidential information about illegal contracts involving a partner company, one that Harrison Tech had co-invested in, hit the news. Explosive headlines, cropped images, endless speculation. Investor confidence melted like ice on hot pavement. The stock market responded with brutal force. Shares crashed, and Blake's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Advisors, lawyers, board members, all with tense, urgent voices and questions that didn't seek answers, only solutions. But there were no solutions. He knew, even without direct involvement, he would be swept away by the avalanche. The name Harrison, long synonymous with power and innovation, was now the epicenter of a financial scandal shaking Wall Street to its core. By midnight, Blake was alone in the office. The once busy hallways, filled with hurried steps and decisive voices, now stood empty. His reflection in the glass window looked like that of a defeated man. And he was. The empire he had spent 2 decades building was crumbling in a matter of hours. Messages began arriving, cold, almost mechanical. "Unfortunately, we'll have to distance ourselves publicly. Blake, it's best you don't show up tomorrow. The lawyers say we need a scapegoat. Friends? None. Partners? All distant." Not even his personal assistant replied to his last messages. It was as if he had ceased to exist. Deep in his heart, a hollow space began to form, not from the financial loss, but from the brutal realization that he had never truly had anyone by his side. His success, his prestige, his golden throne, it was all conditional. And now, without any of it, he was just a man. Alone. Wounded. Exposed. As the city slept beneath the storm, Blake Harrison understood, for the first time, what it truly meant to lose everything. What he didn't know was that, even among the wreckage, someone was preparing to walk toward him, not out of interest, but for something rare, nearly extinct: compassion. Saturday dawned gray, as if the city itself could feel the weight of the corporate tragedy splashed across every headline. The Harrison empire collapses. CEO at the center of the storm. The newspapers displayed Blake's face with ruthless clarity. Commentaries, analyses, judgments. Suddenly, everyone knew who he was, but no one wanted to stand beside him. Except for one person. Emily learned of Blake's downfall from the morning news as she sipped her black coffee in the tiny kitchen of her rented apartment. Seeing his name in the headlines made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't ignore. She spent the morning trying to convince herself she shouldn't get involved. But her intuition was louder. What she felt wasn't pity, it was connection. It was loyalty. It was care. By late afternoon, while most employees were avoiding even walking past the company building, Emily took the subway with a plain paper bag in her hands. Inside, 2 thermoses of fresh coffee, 2 egg sandwiches wrapped in foil, and a handwritten note that read, "No one deserves to go through this alone." The building was nearly empty. Security hesitated to let her up, but she insisted, and whether out of surprise or compassion, they allowed it. She reached the top floor, her heart pounding. She knocked on the door of Blake's former office. No response. She tried again. When the door finally opened, she saw him. Blake was barefoot, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes distant. The man who had once embodied perfection was now just a tired soul standing before her. "Emily?" he whispered, incredulous. I brought coffee," she said, lifting the bag, trying to smile. "I thought maybe you could use some." He didn't speak. He simply stepped back, leaving the door open. She walked in, placed the bag on the table, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Then he broke, not with screams or panic, but with quiet, deep tears that ran down the face of a man who had always needed to be strong. Emily stepped closer and, with a gentle gesture, placed her hand over his. It was the first sincere touch he had received in years. And there, among torn papers, rain-soaked windows, and an empire in ruins, something more powerful than any fortune was born. The feeling of being seen and cared for. Emily didn't leave that night. She stayed in silence beside him, sipping coffee, listening to his pauses, honoring his pain. And though she said nothing about what she felt, her presence spoke volumes. She was the only one who remained, and ironically, she was everything he needed. The night moved slowly, wrapped in the stillness of Harrison Tech's top floor. Outside, the city, normally loud and restless, seemed to honor Blake's pain. The two of them sat there, side by side on the leather couch, surrounded by an atmosphere that was both heavy and tender. Emily still held her cup of coffee. Blake, now with reddened eyes, looked smaller than ever before, but strangely more human. "I've lost everything," he murmured, for the first time out loud. The words came out heavy, as if they physically hurt. Emily, her eyes locked on his, didn't answer right away. She simply leaned in gently and took the cup from his hand, setting it down on the table. Then, without hesitation, she wrapped his hand in both of hers. Her touch was warm, steady, and full of compassion. There was no pity in that gesture. It was equal to equal, soul to soul. "You still have you," she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. Blake didn't know how to respond. He was used to contracts, numbers, and appearances. He had no idea how to handle affection that came with no strings attached. Completely disarmed him. This time, the tears came differently. Not the quiet, hidden ones from before. Now they were stifled sobs, raw pain, words stuck in his throat. Emily moved in a little closer and, without thinking, pulled him into an embrace. He let her. There, in the arms of that simple woman, Blake allowed himself to be vulnerable. For the first time in decades, he cried like a boy, and he felt no need to hide it. Time stood still. Emily didn't speak. She simply held him, her heart beating in rhythm with his. Her fingers gently brushed the back of his neck, and that small gesture had a devastating effect. Blake leaned his face into her shoulder and closed his eyes, like someone finally finding shelter after a storm that lasted far too long. When the crying stopped, he pulled back slowly, a little embarrassed. But she smiled. Not just any smile, one of those rare smiles that forgive, that comfort, that say, "I'm here," without a single word. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You don't have to thank me. I didn't come here out of duty. I came because I care about you." And there, between tears and gentle touches, something new began to take form. Something still without a name, but already impossible to ignore. The next morning, the sky was clear, as if the city itself had exhaled after the storm. Blake, however, still felt like he was drifting in fog. His eyes burned from exhaustion, and his mind throbbed with the hangover of a life collapsing. He was sitting at his office desk, staring into nothing, when Emily, standing quietly by the door, spoke softly. "You can't stay here. This is just an empty building now, Blake." He looked at her, confused, like a man with no direction left. And that's when she added, with the same gentle firmness that had comforted him just hours before, "Come with me. I have a place. It's small, but it's clean, and the door is always open." He hesitated, not out of pride but shame. How could he accept something from someone so far removed from his world? How could he intrude upon the simplicity of someone he barely knew, and yet already trusted more than anyone he had ever known? But there was something in her eyes, something that didn't judge, didn't demand, didn't expect anything in return. It only wanted to offer kindness. So he said yes. Emily's apartment was in Jersey City, in an old building with a worn facade. They climbed 2 flights of stairs and stepped into a small, cozy space. There were dried flowers in a vase by the window, hand-embroidered dish towels, and a worn-out couch that somehow felt incredibly inviting. It was the opposite of everything Blake had known, and yet somehow it was exactly what he needed. She showed him the guest room, simple, with clean sheets and a lamp that gave off a warm golden glow. He walked in quietly, set down his backpack, the only one he had brought, with nearly nothing inside, and looked around like someone stepping onto sacred ground. Felt like home. In the days that followed, a gentle rhythm began to take shape. She would leave early for work, and he would stay, lost in thoughts and memories. The first week passed in silence and adjustment, but little by little, life began to unfold with surprising softness. They started cooking together, sharing tasks with shy laughter and scattered stories. Blake offered to help with groceries, wash dishes after dinner, and even learned how to fold fitted sheets, something he'd never imagined himself doing. Emily smiled as she watched him rediscover himself, and he, in turn, found himself captivated by her details. The way she tied her hair up with a pencil, the way she hummed softly while cooking, the way she made the ordinary feel extraordinary. The man who once had everything was now learning the value of the small things. And more than that, the value of a woman who, even with so little, gave everything: warmth, dignity, peace. Blake's life was no longer golden, but for the first time it was becoming real. The days passed gently in Emily's little apartment. Time inside those walls seemed to move at its own pace, almost as if it understood that something rare was being nurtured there. A kind of bond that didn't rely on grand declarations, but on comfortable silences and gestures that spoke louder than any words. Gradually, Blake began to shed his old armor. He no longer dressed the way he used to. Designer shirts were replaced by plain t-shirts, and his $1 million watch sat untouched on the dresser, like an artifact from another life. He traded the relentless noise of the financial world for the quiet sounds of daily life. The hiss of the kettle, the shuffle of slippers across the floor, the crisp snap of toast browning in the pan. Emily watched him from a distance, with the quiet understanding of someone who knows that the deepest feelings aren't born from promises, but from presence. At night, the couch became a stage for spontaneous conversations. They spoke of childhood, his marked by silence, pressure, and suffocating expectations. Hers, shaped by simplicity and absence, but also by the small gestures of affection that molded her tenderness. Emily shared stories of her mother, who sewed dresses to keep the household afloat, and Blake listened as if every word she spoke was a place he had never been before. "Do you believe life can start over, even after you've lost everything?" he asked one night, staring at the ceiling. "Life doesn't start over," Emily replied without hesitation. "It keeps going, but we get to choose how it goes on." There was truth in her answer, a truth that disarmed him completely. They began growing used to each other's presence. Blake no longer found it strange to discover little notes from Emily on the fridge, messages like, "Good luck today," or "Trust yourself." "I do." And Emily, though she never said it out loud, waited anxiously for his return each evening. One Sunday, they watched a movie on the couch. Near the end, Blake, without even realizing it, rested his head on Emily's shoulder. She didn't move. She just let it happen. And in that moment, something invisible yet irreversible was sealed. The certainty that what they were building wasn't temporary. Love, unnamed, unspoken, was already living between them. All they had to do was breathe. It was a quiet night, the kind where even the air seems to whisper memories. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the small apartment, its rhythmic sound filling the silences with a melancholic comfort. Blake and Emily sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by tea mugs, open books, and the remnants of a home-cooked dinner. He spoke of what he remembered of his mother, the last truly loving figure in his life. When his voice faltered, Emily looked at him with tenderness. And then, as if gathering the courage to cross an inner bridge, she murmured, "I had to learn to be strong too, way too early." Blake looked at her. He didn't speak. He waited. "My dad left us when I was 7. My mom cleaned houses. 3, sometimes for a day. She came home exhausted, but she always smiled. I grew up watching her turn so little into so much." Emily paused, her eyes fixed on the past. "I had to drop out of school to help her. I never dreamed big. I just wanted stability, place to call mine, somewhere safe." She swallowed hard. Blake felt the weight of her words drift across the room like a heavy breeze. "And love?" he asked gently. Emily let out a soft, bittersweet smile. "It never happened. I guess I was never anyone's first choice. Always in the back of the room, the edge of the photo. People walk past me, but they don't really see me. Only you did." Those last words struck Blake like nothing ever had, because he knew what it was like to be seen only for what you had, not for who you were. And here was Emily, revealing herself completely, not with drama, but with the quiet courage of someone who had survived without ever losing her softness. He moved a little closer, crossing that sacred space between vulnerability and connection. He touched her hand gently and said, "I saw you, and now that I can't not see you anymore." Emily looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. And in that moment, without promises, without kisses, a bond tightened between them. It was as if one's wounds fit perfectly into the scars of the other. Her past didn't push Blake away, it pulled him closer. Because deep down, he was beginning to understand. The pains that withstand time can also become seeds of the truest kind of love. The days began to fold into a new kind of routine, not one of monotony, but one made of small rituals that warmed the soul. Life with Emily started shaping Blake in quiet, powerful ways, like wind carving stone over the years. He, who once measured worth by how many zeros followed a number, now found himself moved by the smallest details. The way Emily played classical music on Sunday mornings, the way she sliced fruit so carefully, as if everything deserved tenderness. Her eyes lit up when she talked about the flowers starting to bloom on the little kitchen windowsill. Blake watched, absorbed it all, and changed. He began waking up early just to make coffee before she left for work. One morning, he bought fresh bread from the bakery on the corner and felt an odd kind of joy when she smiled at the gesture. It was one late afternoon, sitting on the stoop outside her building, that he realized. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. A group of kids played on the sidewalk. An elderly woman walked by with her grocery cart. A dog wagged its tail for no reason at all, and all of it so simple, so ordinary, felt more real than any boardroom meeting he'd ever sat through. He felt ashamed of who he had once been, of all the times he had ignored people like Emily, of the moments when he treated kindness as obligation and loyalty as currency. One night, staring up at the stars from her bedroom window, he whispered softly, as if confessing to himself, "I was blind, and didn't even know it." Emily, who was walking down the hallway, heard him. She paused at the door, saying nothing. He noticed her and smiled. She stepped closer, sat beside him, and rested her head on his shoulder. And there they stayed. No rush, no speeches. Blake was beginning to see the world with new eyes, cleansed eyes. And what surprised him most was that, in this new perspective, Emily was at the center, not as a savior but as a beacon. The one person who had seen him before he had even seen himself. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He was just a man, and, for the first time, he was beginning to like the reflection in the mirror. It was Friday. The week had been long, but not because of responsibilities. Rather, because of the quiet emotions that lingered between Blake and Emily. Their glances lasted longer. Their smiles carried deeper meaning, and their silences were rich with unspoken words. But something was still missing, the moment when everything would become tangible. Blake woke up early that day. His heart beat with a good kind of restlessness, like destiny was whispering something important. While Emily was at work, he spent the day walking around the city, pockets nearly empty, but his mind full of ideas. With what little he had left, he bought a few simple things, small candles, wildflowers picked from a nearby park, and the ingredients for her favorite dish. Spaghetti aglio e olio with a hint of lemon, which she had once mentioned in passing, never imagining he was paying attention. By sunset, he climbed to the building's rooftop. It was a forgotten space, half abandoned, with dried-up planters and a rusted bench. But he transformed it. He swept the floor, covered the bench with an old blanket from the living room, lit candles inside glass jars, and set the scene for the first dinner he had ever prepared with his own hands. When Emily came home, tired and with her hair tousled by the city wind, she found a note taped to the door. "Trust me. Rooftop. 7 p.m. She climbed the stairs, a little skeptical, and when she opened the rooftop door, she stopped in her tracks. The setting was simple but full of meaning. The candles flickered in the breeze, the scent of fresh garlic still lingered in the air, and Blake, wearing a white shirt and a slightly nervous smile, reached his hand out to her. "It's not a five-star restaurant, but I hope the sky makes up for it," he said, pointing to the clear night sprinkled with stars. Emily laughed, touched. She took his hand and stepped closer. They sat on the ground, sharing the meal off dessert plates. They ate between laughter, memories, and long, lingering looks. When silence finally fell, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was necessary. And then, Blake looked at her with a gentle certainty and said, "Emily, I don't know exactly when this started. I just know I don't want it to end. Being with you gave me my life back, and I've fallen in love with you." She looked at him, speechless, her eyes shimmering with surprise and tenderness. After a brief moment, she replied, "So have I. I think Ever since that first good morning, the one where you actually looked into my eyes, their first kiss wasn't cinematic. It was real, sweet, hesitant, full of emotions long held back that had finally found a place to land. And there, beneath the New Jersey sky, surrounded by cheap candles and genuine feelings, two worlds came together in a single breath. Love, at last, had become undeniable. The morning after the rooftop dinner, Blake woke up feeling different. There was something new in his chest, not just love, but momentum, a genuine desire to start over, not to prove anything to the world, but to be worthy of the woman who believed in him when no one else did. Emily was still sleeping, her face peaceful between the sheets, and he watched her for a few moments with a mixture of gratitude and reverence. Then he got up quietly and, for the first time in a long time, sat in front of a blank notebook. He spent hours scribbling ideas, remembering old projects that never had room in the corporate empire. He wanted something different now, something smaller, more human. He thought about creating an app that connected small businesses with local professionals, giving visibility to overlooked talents like seamstresses, mechanics, artists, and, why not, cleaning ladies. When Emily heard the idea, she smiled with pride. You don't just want to rebuild your life, you want to rebuild others too. You were the one who taught me that, without even realizing it, he replied. Slowly, they began putting together a plan. They used the small kitchen table as their makeshift office. Emily helped with notes, suggested names, tested early prototypes. Sometimes they made mistakes, got frustrated, but they never gave up. Blake, now with fewer resources but far more heart, reached out to local investors, attended community meetups, and used his market knowledge to open doors, while relying on his newly gained humility to actually listen once inside. There was one night when they rode the subway home after a meeting that had gone poorly. He looked visibly exhausted. Emily held his hand and said, "Even when it doesn't work out, I'm proud of you." It was all he needed to keep going. Without grand announcements or spotlights, the project quietly took shape. Small, modest, but real. The first connections were made. The first grateful smiles arrived. And Blake realized he was, in fact, building a new kind of empire, not one of luxury, but of purpose. And this time, he knew. No matter what happened, he wouldn't be alone. Emily was a part of everything. And he finally understood that starting over didn't mean climbing back to the top. It meant learning to love the journey, step by step, hand in hand with the one who never let go. Months had passed since that first sketch on their cramped kitchen table. The app, once a humble dream, was now operating in 4 neighborhoods and beginning to draw attention. There were no arrogant investors or flashy headlines. Recognition came slowly, in thank you emails, heartfelt messages, and sincere glances at community meetings. With every achievement, Blake would look to his side, and there she was. Always, not always speaking, but always present. Organizing papers, offering coffee, asking simple questions that unraveled complex problems. And every time he looked at her, everything made sense. They were now officially living together. Emily's apartment had become a shared home, where simplicity reigned but joy was abundant. They bought a bigger table because dinners had become sacred. They welcomed friends, clients from the project, neighbors. What had been a home for 2 became a refuge for many. Blake never returned to being the man he once was, and he didn't want to. His name had even started to circulate again in business circles, but he turned down proposals that aimed to turn the project into something purely commercial. His purpose was clear. He knew what it had cost to reach this point, and more than ever, he knew how much he owed to the woman standing beside him. One sunny afternoon, after a community meeting, an elderly man with white hair shook Blake's hand and said, "You've built something beautiful, but I can tell. The real glow is in the way you look at her." Blake just smiled. The man was right. Later that same day, as they were washing dishes together and laughing over a silly joke, Blake suddenly stopped. He went quiet, gazing at Emily as if he were seeing her for the very first time again. She looked back at him, curious. "What is it?" "I was just thinking. I never imagined the happiest moment of my life would be this one. Right here, right now, with you." Emily smiled, unsure of what to say, but in that moment no words were needed, because everything they had built, from ruin to affection, from pain to trust, was there between them, alive, strong, undeniable. They didn't need fortune or applause. They had each other. They had a purpose. They had love. And that was their new definition of success. It was late afternoon when Blake invited Emily to go up to the rooftop again. The same place where, months earlier, he had improvised a dinner among candles and hope. Now, the sky was painted in golden and orange tones, as if the city itself knew that night held something special. Emily climbed the stairs without hurry, slightly suspicious, her hair tied up carelessly, wearing a simple blouse and her usual effortless smile. When she pushed open the door, she found a modest but perfectly arranged setting. A blanket spread out, 2 glasses filled with grape juice, and tiny lights strung above them, twinkling softly like cotton stars. Blake was there, standing, with a light in his eyes she had never seen before. A light made of nerves, love, and truth. "Is this for some special date I forgot?" she asked, trying to ease the moment with a bit of humor. "It's for all the dates we haven't lived yet," he replied, stepping closer. She stopped in her tracks. He took a deep breath. "Emily Carter, I lost everything. Titles, fortune, fame. And through that, I discovered who I was. More importantly, I discovered who was really by my side. I discovered you, and you didn't just see me when no one else did. You loved me, not for what I had, but for who I was, even when I didn't like myself." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't speak. She just listened. Blake knelt down right there, with the sky as their witness and the city in the background, holding a simple little box. Inside, a silver ring with a small blue stone, not flashy, but full of meaning. "I don't have promises of luxury, but I have a whole love, a whole life to care for you. Will you marry me?" Emily couldn't hold back the tears. She dropped to her knees in front of him, held his face in both hands, and said, through laughter and tears, "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Even if all you had was this ring, or not even that, I would choose you, always." And there, on that rooftop where it had all begun, they sealed what had always been meant to be. No witnesses, no photographers, no extravagance. Just 2 hearts that, after losing themselves in the world, had finally found one another. Because true love doesn't need applause. It only needs to be lived, with courage, with surrender, and with truth. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.